This week's Parsha is Parashat Terumah. It begins the description of the building of the tabernacle. In this section is just the description. There's no actual building yet. I don't think there's even really any collecting started yet. The collecting starts in Pikudei, or Vayikahel, which is the Parsha for which, every year I like that song, wise-hearted men, wise-hearted women, bring what you can, silver and linen. That's all about bringing the gifts to the for the tabernacle, which is referenced in this Parsha, but the gifts don't actually start coming for another 2 weeks. I lost my train of thought. Okay, yeah, so it's just description. A few notes that then we can get more into, any nitty gritty that you had questions about. There's one thing is that, so the word Terumah is the Parsha, and it's usually translated as gifts or offerings, that they will bring their offerings to me. Trumatai is the word at the end of that, of the second verse. But it's really the Hebrews kind of smooshed there. It also means like elevated or separated. And so here it just means the things that will be brought to build the temple, or the Mishkan. We're not at the temple yet, the tabernacle. But eventually it also comes to mean the grain tithes that are brought to the temple for the priests and the Levites to share. So it's talked about a little bit in later parts of the Tanakh, as a type of tithe. There's a section in the Mishnah and in the Talmud Yerushalmi, which is the less definitive Talmud, about Trumot. There is no tractate on Truma in the Babylonian Talmud, which is interesting. It's something that I guess didn't get further fleshed out in Babylonia. Not that they were averse to discussing in great detail things that only happened in the temple, even though the temple was destroyed and they didn't live in Israel anymore anyway. But anyway, so that's interesting. Note about the word Terumah. Another thing is, part of this Parsha is the description of the menorah that will be built. And there's an interesting line. Let me see if I can find the exact one where it says, like, God showed Moses the blueprint. Here, maybe it's this: exactly as I show you the pattern and all its furnishings. There's a midrash on this that sort of elucidates that, like, or suggests that God, like, put the blueprint on Moses's body, basically, which I find very interesting. That he has this, like, tattoo of what it should look like. And the only last thing I'll say before we can dig into specifics is just to note that this is the first of several parshiot about the building of the Mishkan. I forget the exact numbers now because I just don't do numbers, but there's something like, 10 verses about the building of the world and 110 about the building of the Mishkan, or I forget they're more exaggerated than that. There's more of each, but it's well over, exponential amounts. And there's a drash in there too about like when God creates the world, it's through speaking, and it just happens. It's like unfathomable for us, so we're just gonna say it happened and move on. This is the world we're given. Let's work with it. When we create, there's so much more specifics. There's so much more that has to go into it. There's so much more collaboration and respecting of each other. That doesn't come up so much in this parsha, but later when we meet Bezalel and Oholiav, who are the artisan and the architect, it becomes really important to know how to work together, respect each other, bring what you have to share your materials, all of that. And so it's worth all of these extra verses. It's worth knowing in great detail how it was built. So yeah, Brandy, I see a big smile on your face. Do you have something you want to jump in with? You're muted.
Sorry. Thank you. Yeah, I have a story to share. As I was reading this, it made me laugh because this summer when we were on lockdown, my husband decided to build a shed on his own. And despite my encouraging him to go get a blueprint and try to follow some instructions, he built a shed and it's still under construction. And he wanted to build this really complicated roof. I mean, relatively complicated. Like he made it the back not flat, so it had an angular back, and he wanted to do a pointed roof, and and he spent several weekends on this, and he told me at first it was going to be a 1 weekend project, and it's still an unfinished shed that we have now. But it just reminded me, like, we need instructions if we want to build a successful shed or shelter.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing in Genesis. God wasn't giving instructions to anybody. He was just doing it. So he did it. But if he was trying to tell somebody else how to do it, he would have had to have many more specifications, I guess.
That's true. Which he does for Noah and the ark too, right? We don't get quite as many, verses. It's not stretched out over 6 parshiot, the way the Mishkan is, but it's pretty detailed. You need blueprints. Some IKEA, snap it in here, screw here.
Right. And the thing is that he kept going back to the hardware store like 5 times. And I'm sure now we could have just bought one of those, prefab ones that you just put together for half the price that we invested in this custom built shed.
But isn't there also a certain satisfaction in, I apologize, I hope it's okay, Rabbi, that I jumped in, Debbie and Dave did, that there's some satisfaction in building it yourself.
This is true. Which is why I just let him, I let him do it, and it's still a work in progress. But he felt very proud of it, and is looking forward to finishing it someday.
The midrash that says that this was not necessarily the first world that God created.
Mm-hmm.
Because the first day, it doesn't say it was the first day, it says one day.
Right.
And maybe God had to go back to Home Depot a few times because the first worlds that God attempted to create didn't work out.
Yeah.
I will just say though, if you had gone to the Home Depot, someone who works there would have tried to give you instructions on how to do your project. And I'm guessing it's possible they also did for your husband and he just was like, no, I got this. But I'm guessing they weren't as insistent as they would have been if you had been the one to go get the materials.
You're on thin ice there.
I'm just saying.
And
I
how
have-
do you tell them at Home Depot, you need this many cubits of this?
Well, so in the building of the Mishkan, though,
Do they have a balcony?
there are instructions on how big, on the measurements, but everybody brings what they have, and we just kind of assume that it all works out eventually, that what they have matches, like what they receive in the gifts matches what they end up needing for materials to follow these exact precise specifications that God has given them. And I mean, I guess they could be gathering materials as they go as well. But then we get into some of the complicated questions, like what is a tachash? And where did its skin come from? Because often it's translated as dolphin. Why would there be dolphins in the desert?
Flipper.
Yeah.
The other thing is, so many places, it's forbidden to mix different kinds of materials, but here they talk about sheep or goat, I guess goat skin and linen
Mhm.
making, I can't remember if it was one piece that was made out of both of them or just the whole tabernacle being made out of both of them, but still it's mixing. And
It is. Yeah, and they are mixed. And the clothes, the priest's clothing as well, mixes. What does that teach you? That the same thing that's prohibited for everybody else is incorporated in the holiest fabrics, the priest's clothing and the tabernacle covers.
I guess it becomes holier when it mixes, but it's specific, isn't it specifically forbidden in talit, in talisim, or in the fringes especially?
In all clothing. And I think Liz had it exactly right, that if the priestly clothing was made out of linen and wool, and you wear clothing of linen and wool, as she was pointing out, you might assume that you now were clothed in priestly garb, and you might have this chutzpahdik attitude. So that's part of the, as Joel pointed out about shatnez.
Yeah.
That but the other one about mixing, you don't yoke two different animals together,
Mm-hmm.
because in some way it's unfair to both of them. So as you said, making a holy place, you're creating something special. So yeah, you don't mix for those variety of reasons.
Right. There's something about continuing to set apart the priests and the tabernacle in doing that. Just like when we get to the land, the Levites don't get a plot of land. Like there's so much in our laws, it's about agriculture, and they don't get to farm, so what does that teach us? Like there's all of these distinctions that really serve to elevate and separate, like Terumah, the Levites and the priests from the rest of the tribes. In Morocco back in the day, I observed the ox and the mule yoked together. That is shotness. And I will tell you, as someone who has had to do three-legged races, many a field day with someone with much longer legs, it sucks for everybody. So there's a reason for that rule.
Well, what were the circumstances, Joel, in which you saw these animals yoked together?
Because I would have to assume it's also ineffective.
I'm sorry, Rabbi, did you ask a question?
What were the circumstances? I'm sorry, wrong rabbi.
No, yeah, I think that was the
What-
question.
Yes,
What were the
okay, so of course I spent some time in Morocco and this is after the French left. So they were on their own, of course, and as those tractors would break down and stop working, they didn't have people who knew how to fix tractors. And they would actually hook up an ox and a donkey on the front of the tractor. They would pull the tractor and the tractor would be attached to the furrowing material to actually open up the ground to deposit their seed to plant the crops. And a lot of them did this. And it was just a cultural shock to me. I'm not into it.
And incredibly inefficient as well.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I can't imagine that would work as well. Even if you only had one of each, if you're saying you saw this in on multiple farms, it seems like there could be a trading, borrowing system to be more efficient.
They would
Anyway,
have a tendency to pull in a circle, I would think.
right. And you would wear out your smaller animal, or both of them probably. Let's see, something else. Join together two employees to work together in unequal abilities. Although sometimes it depends what kind of, I mean, like somebody being trained, right, is someone with much lower ability that needs to work with someone of a higher ability to learn. But then, yeah, when you're actually doing the job itself together, then you get into tension.
And when does the student become the teacher?
Or when does the student think they've become the teacher? What about, let's talk about the menorah. I love the way it's described. 7 lamps mounted so as to give light on either side, its tongs and pans of pure gold. Things in the chat. This teacher learns from the student. Yes, that is often true. There's a saying in the Mishnah, one of the Perkei Avot is the who is wise, one who learns most from their students, or something like that. I'm paraphrasing, but that's the gist. Other thoughts? Oh, here's the phrase I wanted to find that I love about the menorah. On the lampstand itself, there shall be 4 cups shaped like almond blossoms with calyx and petals. I just think that's so pretty.
We never hear about the 7th lamp until almost at the end of the description.
Yeah.
In the 7-branch menorah, do they use the I guess this is the middle one, do they use that as the shamash the way we do on a Hanukkah, or it's never really told
they're
to us.
just, yeah, they're just always lit. So I don't think it's
Okay,
And I think they were all on one level,
right.
right.
the 7. But the almond, there's a couple of interesting stories in Midrash about the almond. The one which we'll get to in a few months, Korach's rebellion, and one of the challenges was God tells Moses, have everybody bring their staff, and the leaders of the tribes and Aaron, they all stick their staff in the ground, and God says, I will show you who is to be in charge. And I believe Aaron's staff sprouts almond blossoms.
Oh yeah.
And there's a wonderful midrash from a couple of weeks ago about the staff that Moses had when he was in the desert and approaching the burning bush. Because the voice says to Moses, Ma zebi adecha, what is that? And he says, it's a stick. And the midrash is a wonderfully extensive midrash about where did he get that staff. And it talks about it's the staff that God gave to Adam when he left the garden, got passed down generations to Noah, generations to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, and Jacob, of course, to his favorite son, Joseph. And when Joseph died, one of the priests in Pharaoh's court was a guy named Yitro. And there was a guy named Yitro, the priest of Midian. He took this stick and he found it to have this Hebrew calligraphy on it. And he knew it was special. He took it home. You've never heard this one, Liz? Where he stuck it in the ground and it sprouted into an almond tree.
Hmm.
And whenever Yitro had daughters, he had 7 daughters, and whenever a suitor would come, he would send the suitor out to talk to the almond tree. And of course, since the young man wasn't suitable, the tree would swallow up the young man. Moses comes along asking for Tzipporah, sends him out to the tree, and what happens? He comes back with the staff. And that's how Yitro knew. I think it's the book of Yashar. It was something I had read during my master's presentation. So it wasn't part of our curriculum.
I was gonna say we took the Moses and Midrash class together. I don't remember that one.
No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. But it's a wonderful story. So yes, as you said, the almond blossom is a very special and significant flower in many ways.
Yeah.
I love that. Thank you. I found the midrash that I referred to earlier. It's from Tanhuma Yashan Shmini. Excuse me. That Moses had difficulty fashioning the menorah to go inside the tabernacle, and God, being patient and understanding teacher, engraved the patterns upon Moses's hands. And that is the meaning of verse 40 in chapter 25, which says, note well and follow the patterns for them that are being shown to you on the mountain. So given the general taboos around tattooing, I just like that idea that there are marks upon his hands, blueprints.
Could it be the natural creases?
It could be that too.
Does that have any bearing on Raiders of the Lost Ark, where the one guy who had the headpiece of the staff and it was hot, and he grabbed it, and he had the image burned into his hand,
Uh-huh.
and but he didn't have the image from the other side, which had the correction factor. It just burning it into one's hand made me think of that. You know, you wonder if some of the people know of the directors and authors of these things. We sometimes give them short shrift.
Aren't those Spielberg movies? Who
Yeah.
directs? Yeah, so possibly. He's Jewish. You know, he went to Hebrew school. He probably knows the story.
David and I were talking about that if when they built the prop for that movie, if they used if they tried to follow, I mean, I do remember that their idea of what a cherubim would look like, but but the rest of it, I wonder if they were smart, they did, so that, as David said, so the naysayers couldn't say, but you didn't.
Right. Yeah, the cherubim aren't described very thoroughly here, other than that they will be there. In other parts of the Tanakh, you know, especially in the prophets, we do see descriptions of various classifications, cherubim, seraphim, and they are terrifying looking, with several eyes and limbs of different animals and everything. It is curious to me how how cherub ended up meaning like Cupid. And when I read this description, I have to say that is still kind of what I picture, because it's so hard to fathom trying to sculpt the like abstract, many-faced angels that we get descriptions of in the prophets.
And this specifically says that the faces of the cherubim are turned toward the cover, so they couldn't have.
So they have one face
every
yeah.
way, yeah.
Right.
No, but that description you're talking about followed me when I read the book Pet, and when I got to that, I mean, I internalized that. I just went,
Yeah.
It was amazing.
Yeah. I think that's one of my favorite parts about the book Pet, is that it does very clearly take a Hebrew prophet's view of what an angel is, and that it is something terrifying, but also holy. Yeah, Joel, go ahead.
I have a question for the group.
Okay.
We read Terumah and we hear many, many details.
Mhm.
So here's my question. In your opinion, could a child of 10 years old or 15 years old or thereabouts memorize this entire selection from Terumah, and be able to repeat it back upon will? So just picture yourself at age 10 or 15. Could you do it? And could you imagine, is it humanly possible for Bnei Israel to do this out of memory?
I have
Alright.
met 10-year-olds that could do that, yes. I have at least one son that could have done that. And I've met other kids that if they set their mind to memorizing, they certainly can, yes.
Do you mean memorizing the verses, the list of materials? What exactly are you referring to?
Specifically, let's say there's a competition that's held in the city of Cairo, and a lot of these bright children are there, and they're going to test them to see who can do this the best. So they press an electronic screen, and you get a random selection. The random selection actually points to one verse, and it says the first three words. And by the way, you have to do it with the trope. Very important that the trope be included. So the 10-year-old or 15-year-old hears three words, and then Everyone's quiet. There's 400 people in the auditorium, and they have to chant the entire verse.
Oh yeah, I definitely
And
think so.
trope makes it easier.
The trope makes
because
it
we-
easier to memorize.
Yeah.
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 Harder to learn perhaps, but easier to
Right.
memorize.
Right.
Let's hear from other people too. What do you think, Brandy?
I think it's absolutely possible. I'm recalling something that I learned about recently when I was looking up some information about speed reading and how people can memorize like very long strings of numbers. And the technique that really taps into the memory center of the brain is to put a story along with the whatever it is you're memorizing, and pick it and like make pictures in your mind of things, and they don't have to be related to whatever it is you're trying to memorize. It's just this simple idea of creating a picture in your mind. And the example that this person described when she was explaining to people this technique was to like, she was walking down the road and first she saw an octopus, and then she saw, and the octopus was like the number 0, and then she saw a stair which was, it represented some other, the next sequence, whatever. But it was yeah, so I think it's possible if you teach a child to use that technique, or any other one that works.
I
There's
mean, that is
even this,
essentially what, sorry, go ahead, Peter.
no, I was gonna say, there is even the story of the yeshiva bocha who, when you open up a page of Talmud and you stick a pin through a word on that
That's
page,
Peter?
and because he's been studying this since he was 5 years old, he can tell you what word on subsequent pages that pin goes through. I don't know how apocryphal or how literal, but apparently there, with a photographic memory, you can have that image of the page.
Yeah, I think they claimed Rav Soloveitchik could do that.
Why do you ask?
Supposing it was the entire Torah, and then I'm going to tell you why I asked that question, Debbie. Could that child memorize the entire Torah? Same condition, you're in Cairo, they say the first 3 words, you then chant the verse. The entire Torah.
I have heard stories of young children like that knowing the whole Quran
Quran, yeah.
also.
Yeah, I
Okay, you
definitely
did
think it's
answer.
possible.
Yeah,
Is
you
it
did
Amy
answer
that used to
the
be able
reason why I
to
asked.
memorize everything they put on the board? I don't know.
So Debbie, you did answer that, because a person who knows the entire Quran by heart is called Hafiz, Hafiz. And these children from all over the world do gather in Cairo, just as I described, and they have these competitions. So this led me to think about the Parashat Terumah. And I was thinking that being a priest is like a hereditary type of occupation, just like today. Let's say if your grandfather is a lawyer, he encouraged your father to be a lawyer, and your father is going to encourage you to be a lawyer. Now, to get there, you better study a little bit. Now, is it possible that the Parashat Terumah has been lifted out of history, and we're really repeating something that was a didactic exercise that was used to train the priestly class? And of course, over years, it not only, it kind of became hereditary. And what happened, these very bright children gave rise to more bright children. And some of the guys weren't interested, had less children. And of course, today, 22% of the Nobel Prize winners are of the Jewish faith, or at least Jewish heritage, 22%, even though we have about 0.2% of the population. So I'm just wondering, how do people feel about that or think about that? Could a lot of these documents actually be a consolidation of stuff from our past?
I'm curious why Truma particularly makes you think that. I don't disagree with the hypothesis. I'm just wondering why Truma specifically.
Many, many details.
Yes, I think it's possible. It's uh, good minds tend to get passed down through maybe genetic advantage. I believe that. And if collectively people find value in the writings that were left behind, then they're going to live on.
And the value of education is taught. I mean, I don't think it's all genetics, but it's,
Right.
you know, the culture.
And making the
Right.
time slots to do it. Some people, not that they don't appreciate education, but their lives make it difficult.
Right.
And we've been fortunate, most of us, or many of us.
But I would say even in eras when Jews were less fortunate with their time or, you know, financial stability is usually what affords you extra time. Focus on education was still prioritized.
It's true. It was enough of a piece of the culture that even if you were poor, it was important enough to have to make that time, even if you had to burn an extra candle.
Yeah.
Like Abe Lincoln, who was not Jewish, but it was important to him. So
Right.
according to my childish biographies that I read about it, yes.
This reminds me of a drash, I think I could call it, of what I believe that Chava was the first woman to learn to read.
Interesting. Can you say more on that?
I think that by her learning, through her learning, she enticed her husband to learn, and she then built a family and became a matriarch to an entire population that was successful.
I like that.
Which wasn't she the first woman, period?
Well, but maybe we only think that because the other women didn't have literacy and couldn't record themselves in history. I'm gonna incorporate that, I think, in my Lilith book. I'm gonna figure out how to play with that.
Or perhaps with Rashi and his daughters encouraging literacy. You know, all of the books about Rashi's daughters.
Yeah.
That, well, it ties in with a progressive attitude towards the role, status, capabilities, and responsibilities of women that the more traditional ends of Judaism restrict, and the more progressive end we encourage.
Right. And in the case of Rashi's daughters, I do think it comes back to that emphasis on learning and, you know, didactic process, that if he had sons, I don't think he would have, like, I don't think there was anything so inherently progressive about Rashi, but just that he had this need to teach, and all he had in his home was girls, so he let them learn. I mean, he
So
also had his yeshiva, but, you know,
if
what?
you can't teach, if you don't have any boys, well, so teach a woman.
I think that was part of his, you know, I don't know that I mean, obviously we don't know it. A lot of that book is based on whatever the midrash of midrash is. Like we don't really know that much about Rashi historically, but my sense from those books, I've read all three, Rashi's Daughters, is that it wasn't like, oh, okay, I'll settle for teaching a woman. But it was, I think, because his drive toward engaging in learning was so strong, that when his daughters approached his desk to learn what he was doing as he was writing his commentary on Talmud, he let them come and learn. If there had been sons in the house, he would have maybe more actively invited them. And then if there was already the men are studying, would the girls still have wanted to climb into dad's lap while this was happening? Like would the whole relationships would have changed, I think.
Well, is perhaps there a degree of progressiveness? Not if I can't teach anyone, at least I'll teach women, or is there some inherent? I mean,
Yeah.
look at you. I
Look
mean,
at
you
me.
know, I would think that we would be worse off if you were not able to participate and become a teacher. You know, we would all be the lesser for it.
Yeah, I don't think that it takes away anything from progression if it happens out of necessity rather than without, I don't know, intention, right? Like women entering the workforce largely happened because the men were off fighting World War II. But does that mean that, I mean, it's still a net gain, right? When the men came back, women got to continue working mostly, so, right. So it's still a boon, but I just think, anyway, my point was just that I think it says more about his love of learning than his feminism. Yes, Joel.
About writing and reading. It's truly a revelation from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Speech is natural. Speech has been with us forever, 200,000 years. Writing has been with us 51 centuries. That is all, 5,100 years. My reference, of course, is the UPenn Museum of Archaeology in Philadelphia. So, of course, I've been studying a lot of cuneiform and different types of writing. And with the Hebrew, I'm just sorry that no one had written it down in cuneiform because we'd have clay tablets. So my alternative, I think people here already know, I read the Parsha in the Samaritan Pentateuch. And what's very, very interesting is it's a little different from ours. And there's something called Matras Lectionis, the mother of writing. The mother of writing. A lot of the words are spelled differently. And okay, leaving that aside, even in our Torah, there's a lot of evidence of this. For example, the word toldot means generations. Now I can figure 4 different ways of spelling that with or without vav. So the reason why I have 4 ways is there's 2 vavs, there's 2 possible positions for a vav. So if I want to spell it with no vavs, I can just pronounce it toldot. And if I want to put the vav in the first position, or I want to put it in the second, left side, right side, or if I want to put it in both positions, so it's a matrix of 4. And it's very interesting that this all has a history. And it's really the history of writing. So like this was revealed to us just the way it is, and we preserved it just the way it is, thank God, because I can understand a little bit of it. And I'm learning a little bit week by week, month by month. And, I want to thank Rabbi Goldstein. You've been just so inspiring because you have such a nice command of what we read. So anyway, if people are interested in that, these resources are available. And our language itself, our Hebrew language is really what I like to call the Assyrian block typeface. It's not the oldest one. Before that, we have Paleo Hebrew. It's more a pictographic type of Hebrew. So anyone interested in languages, I think as we all are, it's very fascinating.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joel.
We're arcing toward the end of our time. Are there other parts of the Parsha that grabbed you?
I just, going back to what Joel's focus on this portion and education, if you picture this, these are people wandering around in the wilderness for 40 years, and they've been asked not to just pay attention to gathering the manna in the morning and washing their clothes and stuff, but they've been asked to build this piece of art that involves many different kinds of skill and artistry. And so maybe it did start something. They weren't just allowed to focus on subsistence. They had to focus on what we think makes us human, as opposed to just living and dying.
Right.
And to follow up on that, my favorite verse is 25:8, Vasuli Mikdash V'Shochanti B'Tocham, and build for me a special place, and I will dwell among you. But following up on what Debbie just said, I'll ask the question, who was the Mishkan really for?
Maybe the written papers, for the papers that had the words on it.
Well, but the Mishkan, the whole temple, the outer courtyard, the inner courtyard, and then the altar, and then the Holy of Holies, and then the Ark of the Covenant, and the cover with the cherubim. Who was the Mishkan for God or for us?
Oh,
I guess I'll leave it as a rhetorical question.
I've said this before, and I'll always say it. There's really anthropologically a huge shift that happens with the Exodus, with Israelite monotheism in general, but especially with the Exodus, that God goes with them, that he's not tied to a place the way all the other pantheons were. So if that's already true, we know the God is represented by the fire by night, the cloud by day, leads them out of Egypt. It takes 6 parshiot or whatever to finish building the Mishkan, but God is with them all along. So does God really need the place to dwell, or do the people need a place to go find God, to feel connected to God? It's the same idea, I think, in some ways as the like a gravestone. Your loved one isn't really there, but it's nice to have a marker, to have a place to go when you need to feel that you're with them again. So that's my thought on that.
and again, and agreeing with you that if God just said, build me a shed, you know, we'd still be trying to build it. But if God gives those specific instructions, gives all of the blueprints and all of the details, you work that much harder to make sure that you, so then, you know, does God need a dwelling place? You know, if God is Ein Sof, the one who is outside, above, beyond, the nothing that was before anything existed, does God really need this little space between the wings of the cherubim on top of the cover to manifest? Or was it that we need to gradually focus in
Mhm.
on whatever, you know, to seek a connection with this Devekut, this connection with God? Yeah, was it, who was it for? And what do we do with that? And how do we now apply it to our own lives? What are we doing today to build a Mishkan?
Hmm. That's a good lesson to end on, I think. What are we doing today to build a Mishkan? All right. Well then, it's been great. We'll see you all next week, if not before. Tomorrow night, we are having joint Shabbat services with Eitz Chaim in Derry, New Hampshire, and Rabbi Peter Levy will be leading our service. So that should be good. And Sunday is our second and last, for now, day to do Pardes. So we'll see you then.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
rabbis.
Thank
Thank
you,
you. Thank
Rabbi.
you.